Okay, this is going to be the second part of my What Telescope Should I Buy series, and we're going to talk about types of scopes in this one. Again, I apologize for the kind of chintzy graphics, but this actually takes a lot of research and a lot of time, and I just use PowerPoint. I hope that's okay with everybody. Um, yeah, it is what it is. uh, I did mention in the last video three or four types of telescopes. I believe these are the main ones. You have refractors, reflectors, and Smith Cassigrain. Now I put Dobson on here with an asterisk. Dobson is its own unique looking telescope, but keep in mind it is a reflector. It's just got its own look, and it deserves a little bit of a slideshow in here also. So let's start with refractors. Okay, this is the general design. The less expensive refractors will have two lenses. These are the kinds that you buy at the department store. Um, Generally inexpensive. They'll have two lenses. The eyepiece will be back here, and the reason it's called a refractor, refract actually means to bend. So this bends the light onto the back piece, or the back eyepiece in the back lens, and centers it up so you can see uh, the view of the telescope. Advantages and disadvantages. Let's start with advantages. Like I said, they're entry-level telescopes, um, generally starting inexpensive. Um, I'll get into some of the other things later here, but they start pretty inexpensive. They're good for beginners, entry-level, easy to use. They are low maintenance. Keep the lens caps on. Keep the eyepiece opening covered. Very low maintenance. Great starter scopes. Um, they're good for planetary and looking at the moon and some galaxies and some bigger nebula, like I said in the last video. Um, you're not going to get very much deep space stuff with this unless you go to a much more expensive one, and I'll talk to that in a minute here. The disadvantages. One of the disadvantages of a refractor is it, like I said, it bends light, and this tends to slightly distort the view. This is called chromatic aberration. It's mainly around the edges of the eyepiece. Uh, doesn't really um, harm observations, but it is something to be aware of. It may stretch out along the edges, and you may also see a discoloration or a circle around the edges of the eyepieces. They do have generally small apertures, and I haven't gotten into terminology yet, but the aperture is the opening of the end of the telescope that you're pointing towards space. That's a quick and dirty definition of aperture. Um, these will get expensive very fast with increased aperture sizes. There are very good refractor telescopes that you can use for deep space. They add additional mirrors and use more expensive, I'm sorry, lenses, not mirrors, more um, expensive glass in the lenses, better designed lenses. Some of the ones that I have that I can, well, one of them that I can use for deep space is in the hundreds of dollars. Um, and I can do nebula with that. It has a very large field of view, the particular one that I have. I could get all of Andromeda Galaxy in um, to do astrophotography with, and that's the purpose that I bought it. So, again, great for beginner scopes. If you want more expensive scopes, they get real expensive real fast. So, um, that's basically that in a nutshell. Let me show you an example of a refractor. Now, this is, again, what you'll see in a department store. pretty cut and dry. This is the aperture. This is a finder scope. It's basically a very small telescope with a wide field of view. You look through this and you find, say if you're looking for Jupiter, you find Jupiter, center it, and then you look through the eyepiece. This is the focus knob. That will extend this portion forward and back to bring whatever you're looking at into focus. And this is a really cheap looking mount. This whole thing I think you would probably grab here with your two fingers, spin it around to point it. This looks like a generally inexpensive telescope. Again, lower price one's best for moon and planets. Great starter scopes. And I already mentioned more expensive ones will have more lenses and use higher cost lenses. So that's refractors in a nutshell. I'm going to be very general with this because even with each one of these types of telescopes, there's a ton of different variations expense-wise. I don't want to get into too in-depth here. I want you to go, if you go to a telescope dealer and they say refractor, I want you to have the knowledge what a refractor is, what they're talking about. It's very generic. This is a refractor. You'll know what it's basically used for, as I just stated in the last couple of slides. You'll have an idea what the cost should be, what they look like. So that's what I'm aiming for here. So we'll go to the next one. This is a reflector. Sometimes you'll hear this called a Newtonian telescope. That's because Newton didn't design the original one. He refined the design of the original one, and it's called a Newtonian. But anyway, this is this is the end over here that aims towards space. They have very big apertures. It's a benefit. They take all the light in, come back on this mirror, not a lens. This is generally a mirror, a concave mirror, which bends the light. This is the primary mirror. This is the secondary mirror. The primary mirror shoots the light back onto the secondary mirror, which directs it into the eyepiece. That's how a refractor works very generically. And again, they can be less expensive because they are using mirrors instead of lenses. I say can be because I don't think they're going to be less expensive than the $100 beginner scopes. They're not. They can be less expensive in general for a good observational and a pretty good astrophotography telescope. Again, the advantages, they do collect more light because they have a larger aperture, a larger opening. There's no chromatic aberration, less distortion. It's using a mirror which is bent instead of a lens which kind of works like a prism to an extent and kind of doesn't focus all light equally. A mirror will not have that problem. So it does have less distortion. And these are also easy to use. I kind of like them because I think they're easier for old guys like me. You don't have to bend down as far because the eyepiece, and I'll show you that in the picture, is kind of in a more comfortable position, in my opinion. Disadvantages. This aperture, the top of the scope is open. Big disadvantage in my book if you're not careful. You can get dust in there, moisture in there. If you leave this up overnight and it rains, the rain's going to go right down to your primary mirror. You get a lot of questions about cleaning mirrors in general. They absorb so much light because of their aperture. Dust specks and stuff are not going to affect it too much. you generally don't have to clean primary mirrors unless they're really, really dirty. So don't reach down there with a rag and wipe this or a cotton swab because you're going to do more damage than you are good. Um, Another disadvantage, and I'm not going to get into this, I might mention culmination in my next video because it is a term you're going to hear a lot. These require culmination. Briefly, that is, and a lot of these have on the back of the primary mirrors and this side, and I'll show you that in an example picture, of the secondary mirror have little adjustments. If this is out of culmination, the reflected light will not hit the center of this mirror and your eyepiece. In other words, this light might be coming down more towards the bottom, which is going to, oh, I just went forward, let me go back, which is going to reflect the light not centered on the eyepiece. And what it'll do is it'll take a star and you'll have egg-shaped stars instead of round stars. So keep that in mind. Most of them come with a relatively cheap culmination device, which works. I used one for a while. You don't have to worry about this excessively. If you do move the scope around, bounce it around, you may knock it out of culmination. Don't obsess about this, but keep in mind if you do buy a reflector, this is a consideration. I put this down, I haven't talked about this with any other scopes, but more sensitive to temperature variations. These have longer tubes, and the metal. So what happens to metal when it gets colder? It contracts. So it mainly affects focus. If you focus at the beginning of the night and the temperature goes down 20 degrees, you may have to refocus your scope because the metal has contracted. Things are twisted a little bit, and it's something to consider with all scopes, really. A couple times a night you may have to check your focus because of the temperature variations. This one can be used for planetary and also deep space, depending on which one you buy. You can get, I've seen, as a matter of fact, I've used these for nebulas. They're pretty good for deep space. Probably not as good for planetary, but not bad either. That's kind of a tricky roundabout way of saying it. They're good for planetary and deep space. If you just want the kids to look at the moon and Saturn and Jupiter, you're probably better going with a refractor, not a reflector. All right, hopefully that covered everything for you. Let's go to the next slide. Here's an example of a reflector telescope. Now you can see this end is open. That's what I was talking about. One of the big problems, and I've only heard it happen a couple times, culmination of this secondary mirror, there's Allen screws on the ones that I'm familiar with. There's Allen screws here. If you have that aimed up and you're twisting the Allen screws and it slips out of your hand right down to the primary mirror, you're going to scratch it, nick it, possibly crack it. Be careful with this opening. Like I said, if that's faced up, anything that falls down is going to go right onto your primary mirror. Again, this is a guide scope. You can see the primary mirror down here reflects to this mirror, which reflects it to your eyepiece. This is the focuser of a reflector. Again, that moves this in and out. That's generally how all reflectors look. And I guess that pretty much covers them. And again, now when you go into a dealer and they say reflector, you'll know what you're looking at. This is a reflector. I put Dobsons in here, like I said. It is a reflector telescope with a unique look. Generally, they sit on the ground and they have very large open areas. They can have ones with tubes, and most of them do have tubes. This is a home-built one. I just thought it was pretty cool. The primary mirror will be down here, and the secondary mirror here, and your eyepiece is here. These have very large, or can have very large apertures in mirrors. Um, this collects a lot of light in general. Dobson's can be huge. I actually saw one with a 3-foot mirror at a star party. It had to be 9 feet tall. You had to use a stepladder to look into it. The guy let me look through it, and boy, the views you get with something with that big of an aperture is just incredible. I don't want you to get a Dobson thinking you're going to get that. They have 6-inch Dobsons, 4-inch Dobsons, 8-inch Dobsons, 10, 12. You can get them in any different size. Of course, the higher the aperture, and when I say inch, it's the aperture. Um, the higher the aperture, the higher the price. So that's something to keep in mind. But they can be very large, collect a lot of light, and you do get pretty good um, observations. In general, again, I'm doing general statements. These are best for observations. You can use them for astrophotography. They're a good observation scope, and I'm sure there's going to be people that watch this that are going to say, you can use it for astrophotography, and I agree. I just feel, and I think in general, these are better for observations. And if anybody disagrees with that, please leave me a comment. It's just, I think it's better for observations. Again, if you hear the term Dobson when you're talking to a dealer, you know what you're looking at. It is a reflector with a unique look. And next, a Cassigrain is a kind of a hybrid refractor reflector. And that may not be the best way to word that, but it is a hybrid telescope. And there's some of them, you'll hear them, Smith, Cassigrain, and Maksutov, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But they're both Cassigrains. They use both lenses and mirrors. That's why they're a hybrid. They do have closed tubes, so they don't have the problem of dropping something down to these primary mirrors. The reflection process is different. It has a bigger aperture, kind of like a reflector, and a closed off bouncing light thing. It tends to have good apertures. The advantages, again, a closed tube. They are generally shorter. It's just one of the aspects of them because of how they are designed. They're really good for planetary and close-in objects, and that is because of the one disadvantage. They have in general, a small field of view. These are probably not good for wide field of view nebula. You can get a lot of the smaller ones, but bigger views that you're going to need a wider field of view are not good with Cassigrains, depending on what size you get. I mean, you can get bigger ones, of course, and again, higher price. These tend to be a little more expensive. I am not an expert on Cassigrains. I've used one. I do not own one. I'm actually thinking of possibly in the future, don't tell my wife, buying one, but we'll see how that goes. And I think that covers everything for a Cassigrain. And now, if you're thinking about beginning this, I would not get one of these to start with. In order of, I'm just starting, I would go with a refractor, then a reflector, possibly a Dobson. If you've got enough to spend, they tend to be a little more expensive. And then this, if you really get into it. This is not what I would consider a starter scope. although they are good for planetary. So it depends on how much money you have and exactly what you want to do. Again, this is generalizations. Uh, Starting, I probably would not start with one of these. Some people may disagree with that. And here's an example. Again, you got the finder scope. Notice that it's closed on the end. This is not the best picture in the world, but um, again, this is kind of difficult to set up, so I just use this one. The eyepiece is back here, um, kind of like a refractor, because the eyepieces are in the back, right on the center. Um, some of the more expensive ones, if I'm not mistaken, have them on the front. For photography, anyway, you have the ability to put your camera here. I could be mistaken about that. This is not my field of expertise, this particular type of telescope, but I wanted to make sure you were familiar with it if you saw one or heard the name being used. Okay, and that is, again, 20 minutes. It takes quite a bit of time just to go over the basic information. This is video 2. If you like this video, feel free to leave me comments, negative, positive. I will try and respond to anything that you uh, comment about. If you have questions, let me know. If you like it, feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Again, this is very general, very basic. I don't, and you can see I X'd out brands. I blotted them out. I don't want to get this into a brand, although if people see this design, they're going to know what brand it is. But if I'm trying to stay away from brands, I've already had kind of one comment about branding. And again, I have Orion. I may mention that Orion telescopes once in a while. It's because I have personal experience with Orions. It's not saying that Orion's is better than anybody else's. I don't want to stress that enough. I don't want to get into a branding battle. There are some very bad telescopes out there. It's all in what you pay. I mean, if it sounds too good to be true, the old saying, it is. It's too good to be true. Be careful what you shop for. All right, that's it for this video. The next time I'll be talking about terms. I'll get into a little more in aperture, magnification. I'll talk about culmination probably a little bit, field of view, focus length. I'll probably come up with some other ones that you're going to be hearing mentioned when you're possibly thinking of buying a telescope. And that's it for this video. You have a good day.